Hi, and welcome to another Saturday episode of the Andre The Beast Crayton Show. Today, we're going to really talk about the importance of financial independence. But we're going to get that information from a young lady who clearly knows the importance of it and how the lack of it can affect your life. She is one of the best up-and-coming podcasters. She's a mother. She was a wife. But more importantly, she's an educator. I'd like to welcome to the show, Miss Angela Duncan. Welcome to the show, Angela.
Thank you so much for having me here today.
You know what? Your story is quite remarkable. And on the Andre The Beast Crayton Show, that's what we do. We bring remarkable, unscripted stories to the masses. Before we get started, tell the viewers a little bit about who you are before we really dive into your whole career and what you're doing for the empowerment of women.
Yeah, so I usually start my story by telling people that I am a survivor of childhood abuse and poverty. And when I was old enough to move out of that situation and sign a lease on my own, I left my home in order to heal and to really learn about money. I've always been fascinated with numbers, and even as a little girl, like my Barbies would be bankers, they played with money, but I really had no concept about what money was. And so I was a very curious person, and I wanted to pursue education and learn more about money.
You shared with me something that was very, very crazy. Almost like you wouldn't believe it. It's funny because the majority of people that come on the show, they say, Andre, you never would believe this if I told you about my life. Before you go into that journey about your ability to travel around the world at such a young age, what was it like in your household?
Yeah, so I often don't share that part of my story. So I know you said we're going to dive a little bit deeper, but I moved around more times than I even can remember before the age of 15. My mother chose a stepfather into my life, and he was not a good person. He stayed on the wrong side of the law, which meant that we had to move a lot. And I can remember when I was 15 and coming home off of the city bus to come home from school, there were police in my driveway. And so I came into a house where my mother was in handcuffs, my stepfather was in handcuffs, my little brother was crying because he didn't understand what was going on. And I was old enough to understand what he was doing. And I was very grateful in that moment, because for me, that meant that this person, this devil that lived in this man, was going to be removed from my life and no longer would abuse me. And so that was really a turning point in my life for me to understand that, you know, God always has his hand on my life. And whether or not I didn't believe in him at the time, to go through what I did, he had a bigger plan for me. He helped give me the strength to endure what I was going through because he knew he had a mission, and I just didn't understand it at the time.
When you say the wrong side of the law, what are we talking about? Drugs? How deep was it? I mean, I know you were young, but how deep was it? And this is a two-part question. Why would your mom? I'm thinking from being a father, and I'm thinking from being a mom. You had to have some type of indication that chaos and illegal things is happening in your home around your children. What was your mother like during this time?
Yeah, so there was a couple questions in there. One, from what I understood, he was stealing people's identity and buying things and selling them. And so we had multiple names over those years. So I can remember that part of it. And my mom kind of dealt with that by alcohol. So anyone who's has grown up or has an alcoholic person in their life, they understand that alcohol really takes over your brain. It takes away your common sense and your ability to think clearly. So she used to tell me that she just wanted to have a father in my life, and not really understanding that the person that she decided to put in our life was creating more harm to us than was a benefit. But I think the alcoholism really clouded her judgment.
Were there other things that was transpiring in your life too at a young age that, and the reason why I'm asking this is I know it's painful for people to open up a closet. The trauma that affects you, clearly, your podcast, there's tons of individuals sharing the same type of story. And I appreciate you coming on, sharing your story. But there were other things that was even more impactful happening to your life at such a young age too as well, correct?
Yeah, and I've only recently been a little bit comfortable. I shared the story of I grew up in abuse. So what is abuse?
Wow.
Yeah, my stepfather sexually abused me. He chose to create acts or do things, that a little girl should never have to go through. And so I had to endure that for almost 8 years of my childhood. And I didn't know any better. I didn't have anybody in my life that would teach me that this was not okay, because he used to tell me that this happened in everybody's household, like this is a normal thing. And, watching TV and understanding that this wasn't a normal thing, but I couldn't turn to my mom because she wasn't really there for me, and we didn't have anybody else in our life because we moved so much. I just kind of grew up thinking that this is just normal. This is the way everybody lives. And so you add that to, I was about 10 years old, and I didn't want to be here anymore. And this is where, I know God exists for me, because my brother was born, and he gave me my brother because now I had someone to protect. I had a reason to live and to continue. And for those of you who are parents, if you can imagine a 10-year-old little girl being so scared that she just wanted to not be here anymore, that was, just a way for me to understand that God did exist in my life, and he gave me a reason to be here.
How often did the thought of not wanting to be here go through your mind? I guess probably when you realized that this wasn't right and you had nobody to go to. What about, that's a part of the question. And the other part of the question is, how many times did they get caught by the police, and where was child services? I mean, I'm trying to figure all this out. And once again, thanks for coming and sharing this story too.
Yeah, child services doesn't know there's a problem until someone reports it. And when you don't allow anybody close enough into your life to really see what's going on in your home, and I was taught to be quiet. And so I'm not going to tell anybody, because if I told my story, he would say, you'll never see your brother, you'll never see your mother, or trying to convince me that this is correct and this is okay. So I didn't have anybody to turn to, and I didn't trust anybody. I mean, as a child, when you live through what I did, you learn not to trust people, because the people that are supposed to be closest to you in your life, that are supposed to take care of you, are not. So how can you trust anybody else? So Child Protective Services will never know what's going on in a home until someone else can see it. And there was nobody around to see it. So that was not even an issue. And obviously, as a child, I didn't know what CPS was.
Right.
But when you live through it, you don't share, because it's behind closed doors.
And your mom had no idea for all these years that this guy that she brought into the midst of her kid's life was doing these things to you. Was your brother impacted as he got older by him?
Well, when his father was arrested and my mom finally left that situation, he was 3, maybe 4 years old. So he had no idea. Okay. I did tell him later on in life, because obviously as a child, when you don't grow up with your parent, you seek to get that information. Right. And I did share the story with him. And I believe that he's been able to contact other family members that were produced by this person. So I know that the abuse wasn't just me. There was other little girls that were involved, and probably many years later. But I don't follow that story, because for me, in order to heal and to thrive from what I went through,
Right.
I had to remove that from my life.
When your mom found out this horrible thing that happened to you, the impact that it put onto you mentally, what was her reaction?
I learned that I was writing an essay. It was 11th grade, and I remember the day because I wrote an essay to an English teacher, and we were trying to take current pop culture music and apply it to something in our life.
Right.
And I was a huge fan of Mariah Carey, and I don't remember exactly what I wrote, but I had written on that paper that I had been sexually abused. And well, I'm a minor. And of course, that's when I learned what Child Protective Services was. They called me into the office. My mom was there, and they, took out that little essay that I had written and wanted to talk about it and make sure, obviously, that it still wasn't occurring. Right. And my mom in that moment, and I'll never forget this, and she was like, "Why didn't you tell me?" Almost like it was my fault. And I was just stunned, because as a mother, like, I would have been, "Oh my God, I can't believe this. I'm so sorry." Like, I would take responsibility, even though it wasn't me that did it. Obviously, right. I was part of that situation. But it didn't feel like that at all. It was my fault.
How is the relationship now between you and your mom?
Yeah, it's never been good. I love her. She is my mother. I am here because of her. Mm-hmm. But, she has a roof over her head because of, I purchased a condo for her to live in, because I feel like it's still my responsibility to take care of her and make sure that she's okay. And our relationship has never been good. We've never been close, but that's part of like my mission now, is because I feel like, or I would like to believe, that if she had better financial education, that maybe she wouldn't have stayed there, or maybe she would never have met this person. Maybe she would never have leaned on him to take care of her family. Mm-hmm. And so if I can teach a woman to take control of her own money, that she will never stay in an abusive situation, that her kids will be protected because she took control of her own finances. So
let me get this straight. Make sure that we got the viewers and the listeners on the right page. Let's go back one more question with this story. Where is he at right now?
I have no idea.
Okay, hopefully incarcerated somewhere and not impacted somebody else's children. You said something about the story of you going all these different locations and really never having a steady home. Was all this done because he was a career criminal, or because he just didn't have any money or the education to both of them to have steady jobs? I'm trying to understand why the standard life of crime with them and taking their kids.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of both. Obviously, if you're stealing someone, and you got to think this is, 30, 40 years ago. So very different environment than we are. You can't just find someone on Facebook, right? Mm-hmm. So if someone stole your identity and they opened up a bunch of credit cards, they went to Best Buy and they bought TVs, and back then it was like camcorders, things like that, went and sold them, you, as the person whose identity was stolen, wouldn't know about it necessarily, because a credit card's open in your name, it's to a different address, and then when the payment's not, the person's not paying that, obviously, then you get notified, and then you notify the police, and then the police start looking for whoever it is that stole your identity. Well, that takes a little bit of time, right. But once that time period starts to get closer, he knew enough to move so that we can move to a different state, takes on a different identity, and does it again. And so that's what I understood was occurring.
And not only did he manufacture new identities for your mom and himself, but he did it for the kids too?
Yeah, and you can imagine like having a kid in school, like how do you ask another school for transcripts, right? And that process takes time because, again, we were a while ago. Right. And, I missed, I think it was 8th grade. And I still have trouble with certain things that you're taught, math and English in 8th grade. I had to go to summer school and morning classes just to be able to graduate high school on time because I missed so much school. So I was in 10th grade when this man was finally removed from our life. And my mom had the ability to move in with my aunt. You know, we lived on her couch for a little bit. Then I had to start catching up on school. But for me, I didn't have another choice. Like I was going to graduate school, and I don't know where that drive was coming from.
Right.
And maybe it's just the overachiever from the environment that I grew up in. But the impact on a kid, I mean, it'll never go away. It's something that I will live with my entire life.
Now, let's take the viewers down another part of your life. And once again, thank you so much for sharing this heartfelt story. You realize the importance of finances at this part of your life. What do you do differently than what they did, and how do you get out of this to start projecting your life in a better, basically removing yourself from this situation?
Yeah. So I knew that if I had money, then I could choose where I lived. I could choose, what I did for fun, and I could choose to have just food in my fridge. And so that pursuit of learning about money, I went to college. I worked many jobs to be able to be on the 5-year program to finish college. And I got a job at a bank. And that's kind of where a little bit more of my eyes were open, because I knew I wanted to study money. And you can study it from a textbook, but until you see it play out in real life, it doesn't really have a definition to you. So joining a bank as one of my first careers, I really got to see people in different industries. People would come in and make their bank deposits. And I was always such a curious person. I would ask questions. I remember this one lady came in with like a $50,000 check, which was a huge amount of money to me. At that time I was 20, and I said, "What do you do for a living?" And she says, "Oh, I sell real estate." And so then that became my next career, because I thought, oh, if I sell real estate, I'll make more money,
Right.
So I've always been on this path of just learning more about different industries, staying in the financial field, and just learning more about investing in real estate and insurance. And I sold my last company last year, and I was able to just kind of get lots of information by asking questions.
Is this what you mean when you say seeing it play out in real time?
Yeah.
The different people coming in and out of the bank, different amount of money, transactions.
Yeah.
With that said, when you started to understand the importance of money, then what do you do?
I didn't spend. I think that probably came from my childhood early on. I learned now that a savings account is meant for you to save and spend it as needed. Early on, I didn't want to spend money on anything. I just had to tuck away every piece of money, because I didn't realize it at the time, but I was so scared of not having money that when I produced it for myself, I had to tuck it away and keep it, because I never want to be poor again. I never want to live in a car. I never want to live in someone else's house. I never want to depend on anybody else. That was kind of what my brain was telling me by just tucking every penny away that I could. Mm-hmm. Now, I obviously have worked through that over many years of therapy. But
Wait
that was
Hold on a minute. You just touched on something, because you teach people now, but we're going to get to that in a minute. But you just touched on something. You grew up with nothing. You became afraid when you got it. How did you get out of that transitional phase from hoarding money? Because you said something, you started a business. It takes money to start a business. How much therapy and training did it take for you to go into this money and start a business without knowing, like most entrepreneurs, you don't know if it's going to sell, if it's going to succeed or it's going to fail. That had to be even more traumatizing for you, because the fact of the matter is you're afraid that you're going to lose this money that you never had to begin with.
Yeah, I think having the right people in my life really helps that. When I worked for the bank, there were 2 women who were, in my eyes, very successful. Like, they walked into a room with just such confidence. And I wanted that. So I would spend time with them and ask to go to lunch, or if I knew that they were an event, I would go because I want to know what you're doing. I want to know how you're doing it. And they were just so giving to me to bring me in, to teach me about investing. And I think the confidence comes from when you have that clarity and when you have that information, that now you become that confident person. So over the years, I've had different people come into my life and just be able to teach me. And I'll give credit to my ex-husband. We were together almost 20 years, and he came from a very loving family. And when we got together, and he actually started the business first, and then I joined him, the confidence came from watching him do what he was doing and what I was learning from him, and how to sell real estate, how to run a company, how to run a team. A lot of that came from us going and seeking out more information and getting education. It's like you have to invest in your own knowledge first. And for me, I have to invest for a while before I'm confident enough to step out to do something that I'm uncomfortable doing.
And you know what? I can see right now, just by your smile, you're definitely like, wow, I'm glad I made that decision to step out of the comfort zone. But you're doing something a little bit different now. You have a podcast. Tell a little bit about the name of the podcast and the reason for the podcast.
Yeah. So the name of the podcast is Empower Her Money. And when I sold my last company, February of 2023, I burnt myself. I was not a great leader. And I knew that in that situation, I didn't have the right people in the right spots. And I was not happy with myself as the leader. So I sold that company, and I thought, I'm just going to retire. Like, I don't want to do business anymore. I've been doing it for a long time. I'm just tired. And it really was because I was not in the right position for that leadership. And as most entrepreneurs probably know, when you say you're going to retire, you get a little bored. And I did a lot of praying. And for me, I was telling God, I was like, I've got so much knowledge and information over these 25 years I've been studying money. What do I do with it? How do I help other people? How do I impact other people? And so podcast is free. How do you give out information to people who can't afford to go to an investment webinar or an event? I'm going to give it to you for free. So if you're choosing to invest in your own education, it's on a platform, go get it, right? How do I reach more people is providing information for free.
What are some of the questions that you get on your podcast that basically takes you back to a moment of your life?
I love hearing people's stories. We all come from different places in life. We've all learned about money differently. And so I like asking my guests about their early childhood. What did money look like for you? What did you learn from your parents? And I think when, people can relate to you on that level, then they will listen to what you have to say. If they can't relate to you and your story, then your brain kind of shuts off that information. And so I love starting with the early times so that people can get to know the guest, and then they will listen to that story and hopefully walk away from that podcast with something that they can implement into their life right away. I don't want to make it complicated.
Right.
Let's keep it simple. Let's talk about stories and give one or two tips that you've learned along the way so that the audience can then put that into play into their life.
You got over 100 episodes. So that means you've heard a lot of stories on your podcast as it relates to finances, financial well-being, mental finance. What do you, out of all of those hundreds and hundreds of stories, what do you find is the common thread with all of us as it relates to family, trauma, and financial wellness?
I don't know that there is a common thread. I've had women on my show that had abundant childhoods whose parents taught them how to be an entrepreneur at like age 5. And then I've had women who, were adopted or came from other countries where money didn't exist for them. I had one woman on my show that used to have to do the 5-mile walk to go get water to bring it home. And now she's hugely successful. But I don't know that I have found a common thread. I think we all just have this thirst maybe to learn more and to better ourselves. And then as we do that, the people around us get impacted and our lives become, financially free for a lot of people. And maybe that, I don't know, maybe that's the common denominator. There's something inside of us that has that thirst and that hunger for more knowledge so that we continue to grow ourselves.
What do you find are the top three things that individuals suffer from out of the hundreds of interviews that you had on your show? There's got to be three things that keep repeating themselves in every last one of those guests that you have on your show.
Yeah, I think most of us had something in our life where we have a chip on our shoulder. For example, when I was talking about when I made the transition from banking into real estate, I had a boss at that time that said I wasn't going to be good in sales, that I needed to stay on the operations side. And I thought, that's not my story.
Right.
And I want to prove you wrong. And I've heard that story quite a few times where something happens in these women's lives where someone told them that they couldn't do something. And so they didn't want to believe that story about themselves. And they go to prove to themselves or against that other person that they can do that. And the investing part in your education, I do hear that quite often. People are constantly reading, seeking more information so that they can be the best version of themselves and show up for their business and for the people around them. And then their business grows because they invested in themselves first. And then number three is you have to be willing to ask for help. I cannot grow myself by myself. I need help to do that. And I've always had a coach or great mentors in my life. And when you're willing to ask for help and grow, I think that's just a different personality than those that are not willing to grow and ask for help. We're so willing to give help, but why can't we ask for help? Why can't we be okay with asking for help?
Before we wrap up, your podcast does help women, but what about us men? Like we make some financial mistakes and we go through some of the same things as well. What are you hearing on that end?
For me, men and women, there was a book written about it, men are from Venus, women are from Mars or something like that, right?
I read that book.
Yeah, and I actually haven't read it because I don't want to have that thought process. But what I do find is men are very logical. They think with their brain, right? And when you hear a conversation, you hear the man say, I think more than I feel. And women are more heart-centered and we get emotionally involved with projects and businesses where a man can think outside of that and make more of a logical decision and the woman makes more of that emotional decision. So when I'm teaching, if my focus is on women, then I want to pull into that heart center, and then women tell stories from their heart and they make decisions from their heart. And not that a man can't relate to that. And I have had two men on my show. One of them was Tim Story, and he was incredible. The other one was JLD with Entrepreneurs on Fire. So they just have a different perspective that doesn't quite speak to me the way that my female counterparts do.
Now, do you have to bring some of that? Do you have to kind of bring some of that male energy into the female psyche, because you said that they're more of an emotional? So how much of that of your topics how much of the man side do you bring into the women's side to kind of make them understand you got to have a balance of both? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that confidence and clarity is more of a male trait than it is a female trait. When you have someone that walks into a room that's very confident, I tell the women that they have to envision what that looks like. What does that feel like here? So that you can be that on the exterior, because I think male counterparts are really good at showing up with that confidence. And when you show up with confidence, people are going to pay attention. And so the woman has to kind of dive into that masculinity trait so that they can show up with confidence, because they want to impact people. But if you're not confident, then those people you want to impact aren't going to listen to you.
How can the viewers reach out to you, listen to your podcast, and if they have any questions about their finances and their financial wellness, can get in contact with you?
Yeah, so Empower Her Money is the name of my podcast. It's on most streaming platforms, Roku and Amazon. I'm on Instagram, TikTok, Empower Her Money, and Angela Duncan on Facebook.
Angela, leave the viewers with that beast mindset that you definitely have taken full control of, and leave it with the viewers.
Yeah, invest in yourself. Keep listening to podcasts. Keep finding information that appeals to you. Grow yourself, because the only way that you are going to change the generations in front of you and break the cycle that you've been taught is by investing in yourself and taking action.
Ladies and gentlemen, this has been another exciting episode of the Andre the Beast Crayton Show.